Among the most colorful and charismatic presidents in American history is Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, or who we call Teddy. Okay, Teddy Roosevelt was your prototypical progressive president, progressive in this era. Yet he was conservative in his natural ideals, where he combined a little bit of a balance between those two. But he saw the opportunity to improve various different things to combine with his conservative principles. Teddy Roosevelt was not originally elected president. He was actually vice president under President William McKinley. McKinley was assassinated by an immigrant anarchist in 1901, and he died from infection about a week later. Okay, that rose concern for people who were suspicious of immigrants that may have had anarchist and hyper leftist intents, and he espoused the idea that, okay, I may not be the most popular. McKinley was president after all, but I'm going to be your new president. And here are some of the things that he did. Um, Theodore Roosevelt became a true iconic president largely because the political figure of the presidency itself he made mainstream. He became the first president really in American history to be the name associated with the major face of the executive office. Okay, it's his iconic presidency is because his personality was almost larger than life. Okay, so he was constantly a figure that was in American mindsets. He had the idea of reform as a way to help remake American society as opposed to overhauling the American society and economy as well. Okay? So he believed that if we can reform, we would make the necessary improvements to be better without giving way to radical ideology that can completely overhaul America. That was his ideology. And that's what many people believe to this day. Americans believe that we can do better and we can change, but let's not get drastic and pull the band aid off all at once. Let's make this a gradual change that gradually improves our society as opposed to wholesale ripping of the band aid, if that makes sense. Okay? He sought to end some of these antitrust suits because he was friendly with the railroad and banking industries, but instead of just giving them laissez-faire again, he wanted to incorporate more regulation to kind of put forth some boundaries for various different regulations and various different movements so that you don't have a complete overhaul of the antitrust movement. You just have an improvement towards it. Okay? He also worked, he threatened to send in National Guard troops with United Mine Workers. When you had workers on strike, he threatened a government takeover, and that helped them end the strike. Okay, the strikers capitulated and said, okay, let's not do that. Okay. Um, Other things that Teddy Roosevelt did during the Progressive era, um, he wanted to basically target several different industries and improve by way of various regulations that could improve commerce, one of which was the Interstate Commerce Act. Okay? And it established an effort to somewhat regulate the train and the railroad industry because it had been deemed that many of the railroads owned too much of the land, they owned too much of the equipment, they had a monopoly in the system, and they charged exorbitant rates because they really didn't have any competition. So the Interstate Commerce Act, by way of the Hepburn Railroad Regulation Act as well, sought to provide some sort of measure for railroad rates at that time to make things a little bit more fair. Okay, so that was one of the things that he did. He did not want to completely overhaul the railroad industry. He didn't even want to. He didn't want to end it. He just wanted to kind of. We're gonna kind of shift. here a little bit this way so as to make things a little bit more fair, but you're still going to make your buck, railroad industry. Okay. Um, Other things he did, he helped to pass the Pure Food and Drug Act, which made sure that ineffective or even dangerous medicines would not be prescribed or readily available to the public. Okay, you think about some of the medicines that are available today. At this point, this is the fall of 2020. There are a number of vaccines for COVID-19 that are in the works. If you're watching this in future years, you're going to be able to tell us how all these happened. I'm not clairvoyant, so I don't know just yet. I imagine there's going to be something here soon. But there is a stair-stepped process for creating things like vaccines and other medications, trials, phases. You've got to work to see what sort of side effects might occur. You've got to see how it might work, how long it may work, its efficacy. And so, all right, there is a stair-step process that was now encouraged because of the Pure Food and Drug Act. Concurrently, you also had more of a Meat Inspection Act that came about after Upton Sinclair released his novel, The Jungle, which basically explained conditions, the unsanitary conditions in the meatpacking industry. Think about going to a supermarket and you're going to go look for a ribeye steak. I love ribeye, that's my favorite. And you're going to inspect the meats and you're going to see, okay, this meat here has a tag on it, best if purchased by this date. Or that meat looks kind of brown. I don't know if I really want that. I'm going to avoid that. The Meat Inspection Act eliminated diseases that were commonly found in our meats. Okay, so the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act were largely approved during this time in the Progressive era, largely supported by President Roosevelt in an effort to improve various different markets and regulatory actions for food. Now, Teddy Roosevelt was also very, very popular for being an outdoorsman. Okay? Of course, Teddy Roosevelt was considered one of the heroes of the Spanish-American War, and his Ranger units that fought in Cuba. So he kind of gained this wild popularity, kind of like an Andrew Jackson type figure, in that, wow, this guy's really popular, he's really fun, he likes the outdoors. Teddy Roosevelt loved the outdoors and he was an avid hunter and enthusiast. But he was also aware that if we are not careful, if we are not better stewards of our environment, then we might ruin it. As such happened with buffalo on the open plains in the post-Civil War era. You had over 1 million head of buffalo and bison on the American plains, and populations became so decimated that you basically only had a couple thousand that would remain. Human intervention completely wiped out bison. That's a huge problem. Okay? And in order to prevent things like that from happening again, the idea of conservation now comes into play. And conservation is heavily promoted by Teddy Roosevelt. He believes in outdoorsmanship and hunting and having that sort of agenda that utilizes natural resources, just in this case, in a controlled manner. If we conserve and put various different restrictions on various different lands for hunting, using forests, if we don't haphazardly seize these and haphazardly hunt and kill all animals in sight and do all kinds of things that could really hamper the ecology of various different areas, we're going to have problems. Let's conserve. Let's use our resources, but let's find a way to manage them. So if you are a hunter, you have to have a license, and if you're going to go deer hunting, for example, then there are special times of year where that starts, typically in early September and on through various parts of the fall and early winter. that's a regulated process, and part of that is because of conservation and game management, we know how population cycles for various different animals work. There are an abundance of white-tailed deer all over Texas. Great. How do we preserve those numbers? Well, let's manage them and make sure that we're only allowed to do things around certain cycles and certain times of year so as to maintain a healthy population that A, doesn't become decimated, and B, doesn't become overpopulated that could have damaging effects on our ecosystem as well. So, conservation management espouses the idea of balancing and managing populations that are healthier for the environment, for the ecosystem, all the while allowing for people to be able to use various different lands for recreation, such as hunting and fishing, by the way. Same thing. A few years ago, my parents and I went deep sea fishing, and my mom wanted to catch some red snapper, but it was just before snapper season. And so, well, we couldn't quite go hunting for snapper. She wound up catching a grouper that she had the guide puncture start to bleed out while it was still alive, and within seconds, a bull shark grabbed that grouper, and she reeled in that bull shark about a half hour later. Wow. Okay, yeah, that was my mom. She caught a 6 foot, 150-pound bull shark. Okay, interesting times that was. There were others, though, who believed the idea that nature should be left to its own accord. It should not be interfered with by humans, not for animal consumption, not for forest use or exploitation or any sort of development. Nature should be left to its own. The idea that John Muir had for preservation also came to a head at this time and became somewhat of a competing ideology with the conservation movement. So conservation says, let's have a managed and controlled use of our resources. Preservation basically says, let's not use anything at all. Let's leave things pristine as they were meant to be. Okay? And they became competing ideologies, and you're going to want to know the difference between conservation and preservation for your exam. But things kind of came to a head in the early 1900s when in Northern California, San Francisco's growing population needed a more reliable water source. There was a nearby dam across the Yosemite Valley at Hetch Hetchy that was on federal lands that were deemed for being a park. And a dam could help collect water for a reservoir that could serve the city of San Francisco. Preservationists were naturally opposed to this large, high-walled dam, and they thought, no, let's not do this. Okay, this is not going to be good. And then 1906 happened, and in 1906, a gigantic earthquake ravaged San Francisco. And it rallied the cry for San Francisco not only to be rebuilt and repaired, but to also have more sustainable water supply. So the fight over Hetch Hetchy was now somewhat of a losing cause for preservationists, and they would have to come to the table and say, okay, San Francisco, we know that you've suffered a lot. Let's go ahead and move forward with this. Okay? It wasn't a total defeat, though, for preservationists, because you have folks who at least came to the idea and understanding that we can do better for our environment, for our ecology, for our forests, for our animals. We can manage them better, and we will. Current day, the Sierra Club was founded in honor of John Muir, who was the ultra-preservationist who wanted to promote the pristine aspect of our natural environment. Conservationism wins the day. Okay? Let's use our natural resources. Let's just be efficient, managed, and controlled in our approach for them. Okay? So ultimately, those are some of the things that would define Teddy Roosevelt's presidency.